Hello, I'm Cherionna Menzam-Sills, and I'm coming back to this video blog after a bit of a hiatus. I realize it's been probably about 2 years, and during that time I've been very focused on writing my book, which I'm very excited to announce is coming out in April 2018. So the book is The Breath of Life, An Introduction to Craniosacral Biodynamics. But that's not the topic for my talk today. I'll include a link here, so if you're interested, you can look at more information about the book and order it if you like. But for now, I'd like to come back to the original intention of this video blog, which is to have some conversation about things that you might be interested in. And of course, that may include my book, but I'm coming back to a question that was actually sent to me by email 2 years ago. I'm embarrassed to say. It was a really interesting question. It inspired me to get back to this blog. So I want to let you know that I am video inspired again. So hopefully you'll see a lot more of me in the near future. And please feel free to send me your questions or inquiries, whatever you're wondering about in relation to the areas that I am particularly familiar with, which are craniosacral biodynamics, continuum, a mindful movement practice, and in this case today, prenatal and birth therapy and psychology, which actually runs through all the others. So really interesting question that I received, which is the embryo or the prenate the quintessential contemplative? Now, isn't that interesting? You know, what happens for you when you consider that question? For me, there's a beginning of, I feel it like in my body like this, like, ooh, it feels like there's some energy that is stirred up in me, some curiosity, and wondering how on earth do I answer that question? Which to me is in a way the essence of being a contemplative, being mindfully present, being curious, being with what arises, following the energy of it. And from that initial response in my body, I had some thoughts, which I'd like to share with you. So first of all, I think it's an interesting term, quintessential contemplative. And to me, that raises the question, well, what is contemplative? And I had some thoughts about that, but to be sure, I looked it up. And there are two main meanings for the word contemplative. And one is to spend a lot of time in thought, thinking about things. And I don't think that applies to the embryo. As far as we know, the embryo isn't thinking the way we think about things. Embryos seem to be extremely sentient, aware, and in some ways very present, but not necessarily thinking about things. And the part of the brain that would enable them to think about things, or at least to connect it into a bodily experience, an experience in the physical reality, that part of the brain isn't developed yet. So I don't think the embryo is a contemplative in terms of thinking about things, but another meaning of the word is spending a lot of time in prayer. So similar to a monk or a nun. And again, I'm not sure that the embryo is actively, consciously, intentionally in prayer. But there are many meanings for the term prayer. And if we think about contemplating God or the spiritual, which is another way of looking at contemplative, and perhaps that gets closer to the prenatal experience. Again, I don't think that prenates are intentionally, consciously, well, I need to think about God. You know, that's not my sense of the prenate. That's not what anyone has ever reported to me of their experience, of what they remember or what they touch into when they deepen into prenatal embryological type states. But the prenate does seem to be, in a way, a quintessential beer, an example, a model of how to be. And we can learn so much from the prenate from that perspective. So if embryos are in a state of being, perhaps they are in a highly spiritual state. What does it mean to be spiritual? Being in a state of being brings us into direct, intimate relationship with something ineffable, something spacious, something mysterious, like the embryo itself is an expression of the mystery. How does one little cell become these magnificent beings? And I like to think of the embryo as being a direct expression of the cosmos. It's said that we're all made up of stardust. And my dear mentor, Emily Conrad, would talk about the embryo as spiraled water, the cosmos as spiraled water, and water being a highly resonant element. There's a direct stream of resonance between them. So I can see embryo as being highly spiritual from that perspective. Not necessarily thinking about spirit, but definitely spending a lot of time being with, perhaps being spirit. And that's something I would aspire to. The being with, the beingness. Being one with the cosmos, as we all are, I believe. But do we experience that? I'm not sure that the embryo experiences the kind of separateness that you and I do, that we've all learned to experience as a way to function here. Embryos have something different to offer there. So I don't know if the embryo, the prenate, has any choice other than to be with what's there. I realize that's a big statement. Right? What comes to mind when I say that actually is that what can happen for the prenate is that they can dissociate. They can become less present because of trauma. And so that brings me to another trauma or overwhelm, I'll say. And that brings me to another aspect of looking at the prenate as a quintessential contemplative. If that's like being a monk or a nun, well, does that make the womb the monastery? And there are aspects to the womb that could be like a monastery. It's relatively quiet. There's relatively less noise and interaction with the outer world. And hopefully your needs are taken care of. So there's somebody feeding you. You're receiving your nourishment through the umbilical cord. You don't have to spend time cooking and taking care of daily needs. However, what we understand from prenatal and birth psychology, the experiences of many people as reported through various kinds of therapeutic work or just memories, is that life in the womb isn't always easy and it isn't always peaceful. In fact, often it isn't, especially in our modern 21st century world, where usually the mother is highly stressed just from being in everyday life, which is much too speedy, much too stimulating, much too active. When does she have time to rest the way she needs to in order to really hold her little one and to let her little one rest? We know that if mom is chronically stressed, that the stress hormones affect the baby, and the baby prepares to be birthed into a stressful environment. So whatever the sources of stress, it may be simply that she's working too hard. Perhaps income isn't as high as it might be. Perhaps there are issues between her and her partner. Perhaps she doesn't have a partner. And perhaps she becomes ill. Perhaps a parent or a close one becomes ill and dies. There are all kinds of things that can happen. Natural catastrophes, floods, These days, hurricanes seem to be happening constantly in parts of the world. War, famine, all of these things that, certainly aren't the mother's fault can affect her baby. And there is a certain amount of protection that is possible for the baby, talking to the baby, letting them know how much you want them and care about them and love them, and holding them consciously within you in as protective a way as possible. But babies are very sensitive, and they do sense what's going on around them. They may not understand it, which in that they don't have the full context for what they're sensing. The stress hormones coming in can come in without a context. Or if mom has an extreme emotional reaction to something, baby gets the biochemical influence of that without necessarily knowing the context. And that in itself can be stressful for the little one. So the monastery of the womb isn't exactly a place without distractions. Most often, there are a lot of distractions, and some of it isn't so healthy or conducive to growth and peace, or even contemplation for that matter. Some distraction is important for the little one. And let me word that differently. Some stimulus is important for the little one, because little ones are learning. They're learning from the very beginning about the world that they're moving into. And so they're in preparation for a more active life, for a more engaging life. And again, that can be different from the contemplative. But again, we can learn from these little ones in the womb, because they do have an ability to be with what is. They can be very easily overwhelmed, in which case their only real option is to dissociate, to freeze, to disappear in a way. And many of us have learned how to cope with overwhelming challenge, even any challenges in that way, and we live our lives that way. Some of you may have heard that, I lived the first 20-something years of my life from here up. I learned to be very cognitive about things in order to not have to feel all the pain. When I had a concussion when I was 24, I was in my 20s anyways, it knocked that out of me, so I had to start being present. And at that point, I could become more contemplative. I could actually consciously be with my experience. Little ones are being in present time because they don't know anything else. But they don't necessarily know how to be peaceful with it. If their environment supports them in experiencing peace, they can have that. And I've seen babies, I work with newborn babies with craniosacral work and supporting the families in making the transition, because the whole family is in transition when there's a newborn or when there's a little one coming. And, babies can just go into this very peaceful look, just like, So I was just working with one the other day who was busy pooing during the session. And so they'd be there, and then a moment later, and then some more, and then, Now, how many of us can switch that easily into peace? That might be something that we can learn about. Because it seems like little ones are in the present. And so by definition, in a way, they let go of what just happened. It's no longer there. It's no longer important. Perhaps no longer present for them. Imagine if we could do that. Many of us strive to do that. Being in this moment. As I'm saying that, can you feel your body? Can you feel your breath? Can you feel your body sitting on the chair or whatever it's doing? Can you be present with this moment, with the feelings or thoughts, whatever experience may be evoked by hearing what I'm saying? Can you feel the vibration of the sounds of my voice coming in? Babies experience all that. They experience sensation directly, and that's an aspect of contemplation that I really value and learn about from babies all the time. So a few thoughts about the baby, the prenate, before birth even, as the quintessential contemplative. I'd love to know how these thoughts touch you, and any questions that may come up from that, any comments. Please share your comments and questions, and I look forward to being with you again. And again, if you're interested in my book, The Breath of Life, An Introduction to Craniosacral Biodynamics, there's a link here. And you may be interested to know that I'm now working on another one, which is really something I've been being with for many, many years. It's been gestating within me since around 2004, I think, around the time that I met Emily Conrad. I began taking notes on it. And it's called Fluid and Cosmos, Embodying Our Original Embryological Potential. So notice how that touches you, and we can look forward together to that coming out as well. But in the meantime, book in April. And in the meantime, I look forward to being with you again in this video blog. Thanks so much for your interest and in joining in this journey of inquiry and discovery with me. Thank you.